I'm Sarah Lomax, and I have spent decades in Black media and right now in Black radio.
Hi, I'm Mitra Kalita, and I've spent decades in newspapers and digital media, and right now in the land of newsletters, websites, and meeting people in real life, actually.
And we are together because we are the co founders of URL Media, which is a network of Black and Brown media outlets that share content and revenues so we can just have greater viability and sustainability across the ecosystem. But we're also here to chat about Origin, this amazing, profound movie directed by Ava Duvernay. And I personally think we are two of the best people to talk about it because it is very much about looking at it's based on Isabel Wilkerson's book Caste, which reframes kind of racism and racial oppression under an umbrella of a much more broad framework of caste. And she looks at Isabel Wilkerson in the book, looks at both the manifestation of caste in America, India, and in Germany as kind of three distinct examples of how racism, it's actually a much bigger issue when you frame it in caste. And so, I'm Black American, you're Indian. I think that and we're both very steeped in our cultures. So I think that, we come to this movie Origin from really, I think, personal perspectives and experiences. So what was your takeaway from Origin?
So, you were one of the first people I messaged, I think, after I saw it, because of exactly what you're describing, like kind of this lens of Black and brown, right? I had read the book, so I do feel this like need to say I had a similar reaction to the book, which was quite euphoric and a lot of aha moments, and in some ways, um, I read the book in 2020, that fall, when you and I were kind of in phone calls all the time, setting up URL media. And the idea that not just that there could be a Black and brown network, but there was a Black and brown shared history. Like, I don't want to discount that actually reading the book as we were setting up URL played a role in it, even though I don't remember talking to you about it at the time. The movie, I have to say, I confess, kind of only low expectations, because I was like, how do you put a book like that that's so academic
Right.
onto the big screen? So like it wasn't the idea of the profoundness of it, as you articulated, but how do you show this? And that's why I texted you, because I was so blown away at the creativity of it, right?
Yeah.
Like there's the premise, which is profound, and we'll dive into that, but it was also just beautiful.
Yeah.
And that was unexpected for me. So that's my initial reaction. How about you?
Yeah, I mean, I also read the book and listened to the book, so I have it on Audible and I have the hard copy. So and it is a very hard book to to read and digest because it's just so dense and it's heavy, and but it's also revelatory, and that's what I was inspired by, is just a different way of looking at something that just obsesses the imagination of many Black Americans, is this fixation on white supremacy and racism and the racial caste system that Black folks are at the bottom of in America. And so the fact that she was able to bring a different perspective and different framing and different scholarship and different connecting points was just, it just blew my mind. And similarly, I agree, Mitra. The way that Ava DuVernay approached the film was absolutely mind blowing, because I was like, how is she going to turn this book into a Hollywood film? And to me, the way it started just broke my heart.
Mm.
I mean, I could start crying right now. It just broke my heart. She started it with
You're talking about the
Trayvon Martin.
Trayvon Martin. Yeah,
She
yeah,
started with Trayvon Martin, and it just took me back to that moment, and I'll never forget because I have three sons, and when Trayvon was killed, um, you know, every black mother was trying to have this conversation with their black sons, like, we just need you to get home safe, and I'll never forget my son, my middle son, and some of his friends were in my car, and they were probably, I don't know, 12 or something. And what they said was, I'm not wearing any hoodies. I'm not gonna and that was their takeaway from what happened to Trayvon. And I was like, yo, it's not about the hoodie. Like, we can't solve this by you not wearing a hoodie. And it was just a heartbreaking way for the film. And, it unfolded from there. But to me, that just, I got a lump in my throat from like
yeah.
the second, like 30 seconds in, you know?
I think that scene, I agree with you. And then she weaves in, of course, the Barack Obama moment, which we all recall of Trayvon Martin could have been my son, right? He could have
Yeah.
been me, like that sort of resonance. Um, Wilkerson, when she wrote this book, could not have planned what ended up happening, right? Because she researched it before Trump became president. But there is this through line, I think, from her writing the book, The Rise of Donald Trump, and then Ava DuVernay insisting that this movie come out before the elections, right? And so for me, like that, because I had read a little bit about Ava DuVernay's struggle to even like get this movie made, which that's like something else that is kind of crazy to me, that a woman of Ava DuVernay's caliber has to struggle with any artistic ambition she has. It's like, please give this woman all the money. She knows what she's doing, but that's another matter. Um, I had read that she actually wanted this movie to come out before the elections, precisely to spark conversations in the realm that you and I are having this, right? And to have that same reaction of like, did you see this? It kind of explains everything. And so
Yeah.
to go from Barack Obama saying, Trayvon Martin could have been my son, Trayvon Martin could have been me. Like, we had a black president, we had Donald Trump, and now we don't know what the heck we're going to have. Like, it feels like just like a sequence of events that keep running through my mind.
Yeah. And I think that, I think that the rise and continued ascension of Donald Trump is so deeply connected to this almost biological fixation of caste, and the way she breaks it down into like all of these very scientific categories of how you reinforce this kind of
Yeah.
um, system of subjugation, of like generational subjugation, is really fascinating. And when you read the book and you hear the detail, because obviously the movie can only get into so much detail, but when you hear the detail and the many examples of how white supremacy and really like Anglo-Saxon supremacy in America was kind of baked into the fabric, and like Italians and Irish, I mean, people who we all would agree are white now, were considered a part of that lower caste system and were discriminated against. But, there's something about Donald Trump and his appeal to people. And we always say, it's people who are voting against their own self-interest, white people, poor white people who Donald Trump's, his policies and plans do not benefit them. They really don't. But there is this urgency and this addiction, I would even say, to being at a higher level than somebody black or brown, that we would align ourselves with someone, a millionaire, billionaire, whatever he is, who has no real interest in us other than to reinforce our power, his power.
His power.
And so I just think that it is fascinating, the timing of this film, and I just hope more people see it because there were not a lot of people in the theater when I went to see it.
Yeah, I do feel like the downside of, you know, her funding this through she ended up, so Duvernay turned to philanthropy to fund this, some tech CEOs and tech money. You know, the downside is it's not considered like Hollywood's film, right? And so I worry that it hasn't gotten that sort of blockbuster distribution network. I am grateful that I came to it through some like ethnic media channels. In December, they had some screenings in New York City that a South Asian promoter I know had organized. I think they're still trying to do a lot of outreach among Black media. So I hope it gets out that way. You know, the just coming back to what you said, there's a moment where she like literally takes a whiteboard. So it is a little still bit of like a nerdy movie, right? But she's like on a whiteboard, like putting out the pillars of this um, idea of how you reinforce caste. And the one I remember was marriage, because
Yes.
I, of course, as you know, my parents are Indian immigrants. I was raised Hindu, but my father is Buddhist, so kind of rejected. My father rejected a lot of like how he was raised and born, although he came of age also in Catholic schools. And then my mother, not a especially religious upbringing, but that's how I was raised. And even when you say, "Oh, caste wasn't a big deal in my house," right? So like and probably you would think that, Sarah. Not that we've ever talked about like this aspect of my
Right.
identity, but like caste is allegedly not a big part of my upbringing. Nonetheless, every single one of my cousins' weddings, before the wedding, it is just known and definitely talked about, are they from the same caste? And in the cases where they're from the same caste, it's celebrated like, oh, he found someone who's the same as, and that's like
Hmm.
kind of a cause of pride. And so it wasn't until I lived in India in 2006 to 2009 that I realized all the ways caste actually has been reinforced in my life. And I spent like 30 years being like, caste is not a big deal in my family. And then I was like, oh shit, caste is a big deal in everybody's family.
Hmm.
So that scene where she lays out marriage, and then of course in the Black community, you know, such a part of course, enslaved people's history was um, literally like litigating who they married, who they could be seen with. And then specifically, she talks about the relationship between Black men and white women as something that was highly regulated in this version of the caste system. So I had never put those two things together in quite the way that like this idea forced me to you know marry it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that in terms of the Black community and marriage, I mean, for for such a long time, Black women and men did not have agency over their own bodies, and so marriage was, it definitely existed, but there were so many ways that um, sexual, abuse and rape and all of those things were used as a mechanism for control and punishment and disrupting and destroying families and everything. So I think that there is a very complex relationship with marriage, and then of course you have the the fact that interracial marriage was illegal until, I don't know, with
Think
the
a lot,
loving
a
with
loving
in
ruling.
Virginia. Yeah, so um, there's so much with that, but I was also thinking about the through line of anti-Semitism that also is very current right now in this conversation around academic freedom and what can be done at universities. And we have Claudine Gay, who lost her job, and Liz McGill at University of Penn. And this all on the backs of not confronting this question of anti-Semitism in a full-throated way. And what the movie and the movie Origin and the book Caste shows is that this caste system was very much at play in Nazi Germany, and it was used as a way to justify the destruction of Jewish society in Germany. And I just think it's fascinating that we are in a moment where it's so complex because anti-Semitism is real and it absolutely exists, but it's also being weaponized to destroy Black and Brown initiatives around diversity, equity, and inclusion, and around affirmative action, and all of the things that we thought we had accomplished or made strides against after 2020 and the racial justice protests and all of the enthusiasm and pledges around, oh, we're going to support and fund and just get behind Black and Brown businesses and media and all of these things. And oof, boy, is that over. Boy, is
Yeah.
that over.
Yeah. Agreed. And also that it's so intentional, right? So, like when the Nazis are looking literally at Jim Crow laws, or not Jim Crow laws, actually, I think even
It was
earlier.
Yeah,
Um,
it was kind of like the framing, the way that
yeah,
race was used legally and
legally, yeah,
politically.
law books, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think that, like, we talk, and obviously, URL was born out of discussions about systemic racism, which many of our outlets, actually, all of our outlets contend with, in some capacity. And again, like the idea that this was all planned, right? This was literally a planned economic hierarchy, a planned way to reinforce power structures. Um, in some ways, this is going to sound weird, but it's like a freeing discovery, only because the same factors, such as Martin Luther King Jr. traveling to India to study the nonviolent movement, and Gandhi's rejection of caste, and many of the forces that in some ways Wilkerson discovers are working in tandem, but perhaps we didn't know, the solutions to must work in tandem, right? It's not a coincidence that MLK found this in India and it worked against the British, who in many ways are the originators of American slavery and the system as we know it, right? And the originators of the cruelty of colonization that created the systems of power as we know them that are clearly still reverberating today. So there's just something about that connectivity where if like you go back far enough, um, finding people to blame is not always a bad thing. And that, yeah,
Well,
yeah,
and I think that the question, I agree with you. There is something weirdly like freeing that it actually has been like this diabolical plot to maintain these systems of white supremacy. But the question I think that the movie and the book and everything lays out for us is like, what is the like, how do we rectify this? What is our responsibility and role in dismantling this, because it's so clearly unfair and unjust and evil. Um, but what's the current day? What is our responsibility and role in changing it?
yeah, yeah.
Figure it out, Mitra. What is it?
Hey, that's why I'm
Yeah.
working with you. I do think Black and Brown unity, which given some of the forces that you just laid out, affirmative action, backlash to DEI, like I think that this idea that they're trying to divide us is also intentional, right? So I do think, me joining at the hip with you in all aspects of life is not accidental. Like I really do think that, um, demographics are on our side, both across the world and in the United States. And in many ways, the forces of, these flyers I get, for example, saying, whites and Asians can't get jobs anymore. And, affirmative action means that your child won't get into college. And first of all, like, it's ridiculous, but those forces are very alive and well in trying to break down any semblance of unity among these groups that are a part of the power dynamic.
Yeah, and it's so ridiculous. It's like so ridiculous because like I'm doing this fellowship at Stanford. I just came from this graduate school of business class. There are zero Black Americans in that class. It's Asian, it's Indian, and African, two
Oh,
African people, and you have you know some white people, of course, but there are no Black Americans in this class. And you know, you walk around these elite campuses, and it's not like they are, you know, like DEI or affirmative action or diversity programs have created this groundswell of I'll just say definitely not black. The Black American presence at these elite universities is dwindling.
yeah,
You might have Black people, but you certainly don't have a lot of Black Americans. And that's what affirmative action was designed to do, was to create a level or a more level playing field for the descendants of enslaved Africans. And that's just completely off the grid. But I do wonder, and obviously our work with URL is very much at the heart of trying to come up with solutions, trying to establish, you know, more cross fertilization across Black and Brown organizations, communities, et cetera. But at the heart of this movie, Origin, and the book Caste, is that this is, you know, there are fragmentations and hierarchies even within Black and Brown communities.
right.
So we too are struggling with figuring out, like, yes, it's very romantic to say yes, we're going to unify and our numbers are globally are in our favor, but you know, there's a lot of intra-racial prejudice within Black and Brown communities.
That's right.
So
Yeah, and I think about this a lot because even as I work on, let's say, URL, like, the need for us to address this within our own communities is quite acute. And yet that can feel even harder
yeah,
because it's sometimes really personal, right? So it means like addressing your own family and divisions that are existing or potentially there. Um, and then, it can feel really, um, like, at least on the affirmative action issue, it feels like there's a part of my community, the Indian American community, and similar to what you're describing, like, remember when Irish and Italian people weren't considered white? Like, they're just clamoring for that adjacency and that recognition and that proximity to power, which is fueling so much of their behaviors. And so I get it, even as I find it abhorrent. I get it. And I think, just to like be real about this, like, what does it take to move through elite spaces? I know you just dropped that you're at Stanford, but like, you
slid that in.
and I have like had to straddle this. Like, I do think that, okay, I'll speak for myself, although I know you and I've talked about this, like, because we seek power as we're climbing and we're definitely lifting up, sometimes my own community is like, is she selling out? Right? Is she too clamoring for affirmation or adjacency to whiteness? And that actually comes up quite a bit when you're like in these inside out situations, as you and I often are, where, I do think at our heart we're grounded in our communities. We're working on behalf of our communities, but there's also a reality of how do you seize power and
Yeah,
who controls that.
yeah. I mean, I think that for me, I am so like obviously Black, and you know, the adjacency to power thing is very different, I think, for Black people, Black Americans, because the narrative is, like, no matter, nobody knows, what your credentials or anything. The first thing they see is a Black woman, and there are a lot of things that get attached to that that are not particularly positive or flattering. But we also know that there are Black people like Clarence Thomas who are very much committed to adjacency, and so much so that they'll sell out, their entire community in an effort to, um, just claim and embrace power. So, I don't know. You do have to, as you try and build any kind of business or organization, there are a lot of it does have to be. You have to be in a lot of rooms. You have to, embrace a lot of different philosophies. But I think that the core, and I think both you and I do this, we, we don't code switch. We are who we are in those rooms. And, I speak truth to power in spaces as, you know, because I know that a lot of other people don't get to be in those spaces. And so I really feel a responsibility um,
Yeah.
to speak for the people who wouldn't ordinarily get heard in those spaces.
So before we segue to one of the biggest sellouts in my community, it's like a nice little teaser.
All
We'll,
right.
we'll
Yes,
talk
I know
about
who
that
you're
later.
talking about.
Is there a scene from the movie Origin that lingers with you? Is there something that you've kind of returned to in your mind or replayed?
I mean, there's so much. There's so one thing that I thought was really fascinating was when Isabel Wilkerson, she's in Germany and she's at this dinner. And there's the German woman is basically kind of reprimanding her, and because she's kind of laying out this thesis, this theory that she's like just developing at the time. And this German woman, I don't know whether she was Jewish or not, really like reprimanded Isabel Wilkerson to make the comparison between the Holocaust and American slavery. And I thought that that was so well done, because in the moment, Isabel Wilkerson, she didn't know what to say. She was like she was muted, and then she has a conversation with her cousin, and her cousin's like, "Man, you never knew how to speak up for yourself in the moment." And she was thinking about all the things she should have said, but I know how that feels, and two, I know that she must have butted up against that so much that, like, American racism, American slavery is sidelined. It's this thing, this other thing. There's no connectivity between the Holocaust and the caste system in India. It's just this little like asterisk in American history. It's not that big of a deal. And so I that moment, there was a racial dynamic, there was a gender dynamic, and there was just what like a the caste system in was like being played out in that
Mhm.
scene, because she was dismissing Isabel Wilkerson as this Black woman who's trying to make this case, and it absolutely is a totally legitimate connection. So
Yeah.
that stuck with me. How
Yeah. And
about
she
you?
she found the receipts for it. That was my favorite part because she's like, damn it, I'm
Exactly.
going to prove her. And that's I think what we often have to do. For me, it's the Albright scene, which I have a piece coming out next week about this for both Epicenter and URL. So the Albright scene, I guess we could give it away because if people are listening to this, hopefully they've watched the movie and it's not a spoiler. Um, Albright was Black child growing up in Ohio. He was on a little league team. The team goes to the swimming pool in town. This is in the 1950s, and they won't let Albright into the pool. He has to stay behind a fence and watch, the white children, enjoy their day. And then they say there's one condition that we'll let him in on, and they take him around in like a floaty, so he literally cannot touch the water.
And
And
all
I
the other kids have to get
well,
out.
all the
Everybody
other
else.
get out. Yeah, 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 yeah. And the kids and their parents were like, "Come on, you got to let the kid in." Like they're advocating on his behalf, but you see, they're also agreeing to the terms, right? That scene, I think, two things call out to me. One, just it's beautifully shot and rendered, right? Isabel Wilkerson, the woman who plays her, does an interview with one of the bystanders. And so the impact on both the child and the bystander, I think, is what I recall. Um, the second, which just like makes me kind of choke up, is when there's like almost like a dream sequence where Wilkerson lies down next to the boy and says, "You're going to be okay, right?
Yes.
Your life is going to be okay." And you watch that after seeing what we've just seen, and you know, for me, I wondered, how can you be okay after that? And Sarah, you know this better than I do, but you know, the number of instances of recall for the Black community of individual instances of racism, and then moving forward and being okay, like really defines so much of the community. But there was a part of me that's like, will he be okay? And so this takes us out of the film. You know me, I Google all day long, right? I, I mean, I Google all day long. And so I was like, whatever happened to Albright? You know, like, who is he? And I remembered in the book that he had died right before she found that anecdote. Well, it turns out Albright goes on to become Youngstown State University's first African American professor. And this is my favorite part. He becomes an artist. And so, like, for me, there was like something about that scene where she says, "You're going to be okay." And he becomes an artist. And, you know, he's passed, but he has this legacy. And I actually interviewed the head of the Butler Institute that has some of his artwork. It's going to go on display in February as part of another show. And so this idea of endurance, which we often think about like as resilience, and but
Resilience.
also the beauty that he created indoors. And there's something about that too for me that's like a big, using not so beautiful language, like middle finger up to what happened to Albright, right? And how he took, you know, he took his life and made it beautiful.
Yeah. And I think that the other piece, like you mentioned, you have all of these little white children and white parents who are witnessing this humiliation of this innocent child. I mean, he's like 9 or 10 years old. He was a part of their baseball team. He had helped them win the little league championship, and everybody was like so excited. And like, what does it do? And that's what I think is so profound about the film and the book is, what does it do to white people who are the perpetrators and the witnesses and the allies to this oppression?
Yeah.
It has to do something to, the mind and heart and spirit to be the beneficiary of a system that is so toxic and
Yeah.
cancerous.
Yeah.
So I know that we're probably running out of time, but we got to talk about Nikki Haley. Oh my Lord.
I mean, do you want to
You're,
claim her in
you're
your
your
community?
girl.
I'm good. I don't think I need her. Could you just say she's Black and we call it a day?
She
No.
definitely not black. She, no. Her father worked at an HBCU, but
Say that
I
again.
think,
Say it louder for the Republicans in the back. Her father worked for an HBCU.
right. But I think that there was some narrative that the black students couldn't come to his house or sit at his table, or I don't know what it was, but she's she's a hot mess. But go ahead.
Well, I don't know what to say about this. I mean, there's I'm looking at Nikki Haley on two levels. One, there's a part of me that's like institutional America loves Nikki Haley, right?
Mm.
She's a woman. She's from a Republican Party that's like just a little bit racist, not as racist as Donald Trump. Um, you know, she doesn't love the Confederate flag, although sometimes it's a little questionable because she kind of says that America's not racist and things. But there is something about Nikki Haley that clearly the institutional crowd is rallying behind, to the extent that I think she's gotten a lot of press. She's gotten a lot of mainstream media attention. She's gotten a lot of money. I think she fundraised. I haven't seen the data on this, but like the Koch brothers and a lot of CEOs are getting behind her. This is when I talk about like Indians and their proximity to whiteness and the institutions and kind of the comfort people have with the Nikki Haley. The downside, I think, is that we're ignoring Donald Trump at our peril. And I'm trying to work on a piece right now that's like, we need to treat every day like it's January 6th, because the Trump forces that clearly they're voting for him in Iowa and New Hampshire, but also there's this parallel universe that's not institutional, and it's not showing up on CNN or MSNBC or even in like our mainstream media, but is very alive and well. And so I think Nikki Haley is like this quote unquote like safe Republican. Um, and I'd be
And she's
shocked.
not going to, and she's
She
not
might
going to win the
win.
nomination.
She's gonna win the nomination. So it's like, what are we doing here, guys? Like, but I don't know if that's where you were going with it, because you might have been wanting me to talk about what a sellout she is.
No, I mean, you can say whatever you want. I mean, I think that I don't even know if is she perceived as a sellout in the Indian community.
A little bit. I mean, her proper name, which people call themselves what they're going to call themselves, but her name is Namrata. She goes by Nikki.
But her
Um,
middle name, she keeps saying, is Nikki.
yeah, okay, Sarah, you could claim her. Like I said, she could be your girl.
We have plenty of our own sellouts that I'm not claiming. So, no,
Um,
thank you.
is she seen as a sell? I do think she's seen as a sellout because she has strived for this adjacency to whiteness, and her what she exudes, insane, like her name. Um, I believe she's a born again Christian, if I'm not mistaken. Um, saying America's not racist. So the challenge with the Nikki Haley is she benefits from the civil rights movement. Her father gets a job at an HBCU. She benefits from all of the struggle, but doesn't fight on behalf of those people nor embrace that ongoing struggle. So that's
Yeah.
why I would say that the sellout narrative has stuck with her.
Yeah, yeah. No, she's interesting, and I just think that she definitely is not angling to be Trump's VP, because she's going all in, trying to and talking about his mental health state, which I agree. That's the only thing I probably agree with her on. But I think that she's an interesting character for everything that you just said, because she seems like she's electable, but I still believe that America is deeply, deeply sexist
Agreed.
and racist, and she
Right.
might not realize it, but she's gonna, she like white America looks at her as an Indian woman.
Yeah. Yeah.
So she can call herself Nikki all she wants.
And that's the challenge with her, like potentially being a VP candidate or anywhere else. Is that like what does he do for her? There is another part of the GOP, which is so much of this is about optics. Like during their conventions, they will be sure to trot out
Oh
Indian
yeah,
Americans, Black
Jim
Americans.
Scott. Oh my
Yeah.
God.
And so they have like these, like a cast of characters they turn to, which people are always like, oh, well, could that like help the Indian vote? And I'm like, I don't think so. That helps the white vote, right? All of that, those are props for white people to feel better about a very racist party. Um, and
Absolutely.
that's just how I see it, right? Like I'm like,
Yes.
you all are props in this broader effort to make you feel okay with Donald Trump, right? And that's how I do think that, like, in terms of mastery of image and narrative and all of that, like he's down to that psychology of white people and understanding how to get
Yeah, and they have very smart white people who understand the psychology of white people around them. So,
Was
so
there anything, Sarah, was there, just to come back to Origin for a moment and then we could
yeah.
kind of move, do you think there was anything in Origin that does feel like it could help like change the course of the election, or gives us some ideas for how we might dialogue before the election, both as a network and then you personally?
I mean, I really think that this election comes down to people who aren't necessarily, like activist or even DEI, supporters, but people who want to be on the right side of history. And I think that what Origin does is it shows what happens when you're not on, like, whether it's the Holocaust or slavery or the caste system. Like it shows in a very visceral and specific way what unjustness looks like and how it's so baseless. And so I think that I don't think that lots of Trump supporters are going to run out and watch Origin, but I think that people um, who have some type of awareness about justice and just being decent and humanity, have an interest in humanity. Hopefully, they are open to being persuaded that um, the alternative to like what Trump's vision of America looks like and the world, what his vision for the world looks like, is a regression. And I think that Origin kind of paints that picture of what regression looks like in
Yeah.
multiple cultures. What about you?
I mean, I think that this idea of dialoguing, however we got to do it, like we got to do it. I just don't know how else we're going to reach people before this election because, you wander onto Facebook or Twitter and it's incredibly polarized. So, to your point, like that majority of the country is really not reflected in social media. Mainstream media, I think, as we've talked about, and we formed a whole company around, a few companies actually, are not including these voices. So I just keep coming back to how do you get people to talk about this and talk to each other, um, and then what, right? And then what? But I do think when we talk about how do you most effect change in this country, voting seems to be the thing we come
Yeah.
back to over and over, right? Like it is the ultimate way for us to voice, to literally voice ourselves.
Yeah,
So
and
that's where I hope something like this prompts
yeah,
that.
I think that I know we're wrapping up, but I think that it seems so trite and so kind of insignificant, but the voting piece is what it's going to come down to. Is And I think that this is one of our outcomes that will determine, I guess, how impactful we are with URL and our individual media outlets, in terms of, are we able to utilize this amazing network of 27 Black and Brown media organizations to really educate and empower and inform our communities and get them engaged enough to come out and participate in this process. um, I don't want to own that if like that the outcome of the election is on our head, but I think that it is a very powerful opportunity and moment to see what can we actually do to impact history.
I actually do think the outcome of the election is on our head, which is like keeping me up at night. And this is like maybe we'll end on this topic, but we keep saying we're wrapping up, and I swear we will. But like this week, I've been seeing a lot of chatter. Like, is this the week that journalism died? Right, because of the layoffs at the LA Times of more than 100 people, layoffs at Time Magazine, Business Insider, Sports Illustrated has shut down. Um, Pitchfork, which is a music publication, has been folded under GQ. And there have been a number of other layoffs that we don't hear about, and closures of, mainstream media outlets. Um, and so there is a part of me, like to your point around what's our role in this election as people of color as well as a media network, where I think all these things are colliding. And without voters of color, there's no way that a Biden presidency is possible. Like, it's just like full stop. He is nothing without voters of color. And then you keep going down the ballot, in every single swing state. The reason they're swing states, meaning they're even in play for the Democrats, is because of the
Color.
growing diversity of these states, right? Like,
Yeah.
I just feel like we're deluding ourselves sometimes by like did you know that, the Asian vote in Michigan and the Middle Eastern vote in Michigan might matter? And it's like, yeah, have you been there lately? Um,
Right.
so I do think about these mainstream media cuts. I do think about these voting blocks, and I'm like, they have a lot to do with each other, actually, right? That mainstream media, in some ways, I mean, this again, like we've talked about this, but like I think they did not reflect their communities, and I think their business models were just really antiquated and not pivoting with the times. Which, like, it's not like our outlets are big by any means, but every time we have a meeting, and again, I don't want to jinx any of this because we are very fragile too. Like, those same forces could come for us any minute, and they have. But I do think there's a nimbleness and also very much a clarity of who we're serving. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on these media cuts, or do you like? Yeah, you do.
I mean, I think that I think our industry, the media industry, is it's under threat from many different directions, economic direct, politics, their culture, generations. There's so many things, but I actually think that it's a benefit to be small now because you are nimble, you are able to, you're not carrying tons of debt, you're not carrying tons of overhead. You can make, decisions quickly. But I do think that these networks, these coming together, these um, like URL media, I think that that is absolutely the going to be a very important part of the survival story of media in general, but definitely for Black and Brown media. But yeah, I mean, I just think that it's scary. It's scary to see very well funded, very iconic institutions um, go under. I mean, I do not cheer ever when an organization, big or small, goes under because, and I always say this, Black media organizations are incredibly fragile.
Yeah,
My whole career has been in Black media, and my entire career has been quite fragile. But it's so essential. And I think that the other differentiator is that we are so invested from a mission and values and, audience standpoint. We recognize that the work that we're doing matters
yeah,
to it might not matter to millions and millions of people in our local communities, but it definitely matters to tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of people in our communities. And that's a keen motivator,
yeah.
and it keeps us in the game.
Such a good point. I'm also thinking of the journalists of color. So, you know this. I was the managing editor of the LA Times from 2015 to 2016. My only legacy, in some ways, because it was a short time, was diversifying that newsroom. Right, we went from, I think, about 13% people of color to above 30% in the time I was there, and many of those folks who I hired, wore it as like a badge of honor that they were working for the LA Times. They'd just been like struggling to get in there. They get in there, they get a job. And this week, many of them were laid off. And I am also just thinking of, for journalists of color, that luxury of, like, oh, it's a layoff, like you could figure it out or take this time, or I mean, you got to put food on the table like tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
So I'm also just thinking of what it means when an entire profession is not seen as stable, right? Which is what most of our families want for us, right? That, like, when they say become in my community, like be a doctor or a lawyer, or, all
Yeah,
that
my
stuff.
dad's the same thing.
Yeah, yeah. Like those are the professions and like I just feel like that absence of stability really does hurt our communities too.
Yeah, and at the same time, journalism, it's written into the first. I mean, like the First Amendment. I mean, it is absolutely critical to a democracy. Democracy dies in the dark.
Yeah.
Like it is absolutely central to the fiber and the fabric of a free and fair society. And so, yeah, it's under threat, and maybe that's not, it's not by accident that all of this is happening right now
Yeah.
when we've got this incredibly consequential election on the horizon, and all these media companies are collapsing. So, all right, Mitra, let's wrap this puppy up.
All right, what are you going to ask me that's wildly inappropriate, but you've always wanted to know?
I was just going to say, what are you going to do next week that's going to further your dreams?
Well, I have the local news summit in Charleston, South Carolina, Monday through Wednesday. But I think you know this. I never go to a city and not organize something that's very URL. So, in reaction to the boom in Charleston, a group of Black tour operators got together and said, "We're going to tell our history our way." So on Monday, I'm taking those local news people and I'm saying, we don't need to stay in a hotel room. Come to the tour organized by URL with this Black historian who's taking us around. So I'm looking forward to that.
See, I have FOMO. I've just
I
like
can't even tell you about it. You'll just sign the Amex bill when it comes to you, but I didn't tell you about it because A,
ah,
it's going to cost money, and B, you have FOMO.
mad FOMO.
But don't you
Yeah.
like how I get approval for this live?
No, that sounds amazing. That
Yeah,
sounds great. I,
yeah.
I love it. Well, good, 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 good.
You? How about
I
you?
think, what about me? February 1st is, I guess, Wednesday or Thursday, and that's the beginning of Black History Month. And so, one of the things that I am trying to launch at WURD, the radio station I run in Philly, is a new segment that's focused on Black history, that's almost like a teach in, kind of like what some of the Black academics did in Florida at churches when DeSantis was saying, we're eliminating Black history in the schools, but doing it on air, like an on air teach in about Black history that connects what has happened historically to what's happening right now. And
Mm.
so I just feel like we've got to have a better grasp of our historical memory, so that we, because boy, does it seem like we're about to repeat, you know, the worst part of our history. And so I'm hoping that we can launch that during Black History Month, and perhaps next week.
Oh, lovely. I love all that you do for Black History Month, so I'll keep an eye out for that, and I'll amplify it or at least retweet it to the two people that are still on that platform.
on, on X, yeah. All right, my dear.
Thank you. It's so good to talk to you.
Yeah, you too.